good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Compliance, Risk, and Synomy. Today, we're talking business risk and continuity planning. Steve, go ahead and take us away.
That's a great topic.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for sharing your afternoon with us. I get to be the host, and pleased as punch to be here and kick everybody off. Just to the logistics, please feel free to say hello on the chat, ask questions on the chat. As usual, the webinar is being recorded and it'll get posted to the Compliancy Risk website, not website, but YouTube page. So look for it there. And if, like I said, you have any questions, please let us know. All right. Your speakers today. I'm just the logistics guy. I spent 20 years in the channel and also sold security, so I'm more of the vendor side perspective on risk and compliance. We also have Aran, who is the head of partnerships at Synomy. However, he is also quite the MSP expert, spent years working for Cisco and NetApp, understanding MSPs and their business, and gives of himself as a mentor for technology companies. And look, he's blushing. Anyway, welcome, Aran. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you.
Fantastic to be part of this group.
Very good. And Tim, Mr. Golden, also MSP expert, runs his MSP now, has run MSP for years, came up through the ranks, understanding compliance, and he's pretty much our go-to guy when it comes to understanding risk and compliance issues. And those are big topics these days. And so with that, we'll move forward. We have a kind of a quick agenda, talking not only about risk and continuity planning, but also how it impacts managed service providers, how it impacts, more importantly, their clients. And then we'll wrap up with some calls to action and some questions. In the kind of the meat of the presentation, Tim has some tools to talk about how you can add compliance or risk and continuity planning to your practices. And then we'll spend a little bit of time, very small amount of time, looking at one particular tool and how Synomy can help understand your client's risk. So we'll move forward. And so stepping away from all the introductory stuff, let's bring Tim and Aran in and start talking about why it's a big issue and why managed service providers and virtual CISOs should be offering business continuity planning. So with
Steve,
Tim, take it away.
Thanks for that introduction, Steve. And we're glad to have you help us moderate this, kind of keep us in check and keep us on track. So, yeah, business continuity planning, right, all really starts around your risk and your business risk. And, last session, we talked a little bit about business impact analysis and identifying those key areas of the business that can put the business at risk. Think of Amazon and all their servers go down. Think of Facebook and their DNS goes down or whatever, right? All the varying things in our last session, which you can find on our YouTube channel, that talked about business impact. Today, we're going to talk about business risk and how for us as managed service providers or vCISOs and IT service providers, being able to help educate our clients around risk, around the risks that their business face, and ways we can help eventually protect, defend, and mitigate those risks. One of those pieces is around business continuity and business continuity planning. So, Aran, do you have anything you want to add?
I think risk and planning should go always together. But in order to understand what the risk is all about, you have to understand how risk is being measured. And I think we should dive into that throughout today's conversation and kind of highlight what type of questions as an MSP or an IT consultant you have to ask both your clients, but also the vendors on how risk is being measured.
Yeah, that's a really good, that's a really good point, not just figuring out what are business risks, but then how do you measure those risks, right? So Steve's got a really good slide on this next, where we talk a little bit about, I think first and foremost, identifying those key areas, right? Steve, go ahead and hit the next slide.
Yeah, before we jump off this, I just want to touch on the third bullet of protecting yourself. So the liability for managed service providers and virtual CISOs, both in terms of insurance and government, has been ratcheted up. And so one of the big reasons to keep an eye on this is to protect yourselves, right?
Yeah. Thank you for keeping us on track. That's why you're here, right? So, you're seeing it, or I'm seeing it more and more, that third, fourth, fifth party risk coming down the line, right? We're seeing more and more vendor due diligence happening. We're seeing, I hate to go back to the Kaseya and SolarWinds things. I mean, and Log4j and all of those things that have happened, but, risk transference and risk acceptance between the multiple different parties in the chain, they're not going away. And, for us as IT service providers and vCISOs, like, great example, working with a healthcare company, and I become their named security officer, right? As part of their organization. Now I might be a virtual ISO, right? A virtual ISO, but I am the named entity in a security incident. Do you know who gets in trouble? You know who goes to jail? You know who gets fined? Because I am the named individual. And so being able to right size our services, being able to price those services for assuming that risk, is a great way for us as IT service providers to, make sure that we're getting, the value and the, the money and the funds, the things that, we're due, because we are then assuming that risk on behalf of our client. Not only that, but we can put our clients at risk. SolarWinds, Kaseya, RMM tool, whatever, insert thing here that gets breached and then goes out, right? So you make a really good point there about keeping ourselves in check so we can help keep our clients in check. So yeah, thanks for keeping us on track. So glad we had you here. Hey, yeah, Steve, Tim goes to jail. or I have really good lawyers.
Out of jail.
So yeah, so so next slide, a little bit about what are some of them. Maybe some people in chat could add a couple of more things in here. Aran, maybe you want to talk about some of these. Like, you're in the other side of the world, and while you're not generally in the Ukrainian, Russian, I don't even want to get into the political stuff, but you're in that side of the world. And not that it's a hop, skip, and a jump, but it's certainly a lot closer for me in comfy New Hampshire to what's going on over there, like war, right? War is a business risk. Like, sure, it doesn't have, well, I'm not concerned that my house is going to get bombed here today, but that's real life stuff happening, right? So you got to ask God.
Redundancy is a huge part of, I'm based out of Israel, not far from Tel Aviv. Every now and then there's some sort of, collision between parties around Israel, and not getting into politics, of course, but from a perspective as a company, and I'm talking about Sanomi as a company itself. So building our,
hopefully you didn't just lose internet,
or network ability, everything that associated with our business continuity is really geared into how well we are protected what is the redundancy plan
Mm.
on a day-to-day basis. We are taking into consideration different kind of action item when things are getting really wrong, because we have to keep servicing our clients and customers outside of Israel. Our main business is within the US, within the Eastern Europe, Western Europe as well. And we need to figure out an exact plan, which is so granular that can allow us to mitigate any of those risks that come towards us in any given time. So it's a really high in terms of, priority.
Mhm.
And I think most of the frameworks that we comply with, for example, 2701 and other frameworks, are touching those type of risk and controls that needs to be mitigated.
Mm. Good
So
stuff.
that's kind of the way we treat that.
Yeah, I certainly, like here in New Hampshire, we face ice storms, right? So power outages can be a regular thing here. Whereas, Steve over there in California is worried about, the whole state falling in the ocean when the big one happens, right? I have clients in the Pacific Northwest that always talk about the big one and what are we doing for backups when the big one comes, right? So there are these, as the slide shows, act of God, right? But it's more about not just understanding things like cyber attacks, acts of omission, acts of God, whatever, acts of war, whatever, those things.
Internet outage, mishaps with the service of local AWS, because that can happen as well.
Correct.
But I think it's interesting how the country treats the geopolitics circumstances within Israel, for example. So we have built over the past decade multiple data centers that allow us to be up and running even if we get into a certain crisis that's is part of a war or other collisions.
Right. Love the word collision. It's a good PC word in these unstable times, uncertainties.
It's yeah.
It is. Exactly. It is. So when we talk about risk, Steve dumped over there in chat, like financial institutions talk about in terms of dollars and cents, but maybe if you want, in chat, everybody that's listening, maybe think of a couple of other areas that might not be listed here on the slide when you think about business risk, either for yourself or for your clients. I'll go first. Data leakage. What about you, Steve? Give me one.
So I have an example where someone miscoded a huge database, and it kept writing and writing and writing, and they couldn't stop it. And the database blew up.
Wow.
And it took them, they had to rebuild the database from scratch. And it was bad coding.
Wow.
The programmer that coded the database did a crappy job. So the risk was in the coding.
Yeah, we don't necessarily talk about that portion of the SBON, the software bill, like the things in the software that we're either using or writing for our clients. Like, yeah, there can be significant risks. You place a decimal point in the wrong spot, throws everything off. Right. What about you, Orion? One specific example of a category of business risk.
It's interesting because we were going through kind of a workflow that actually is part of the way people are using certain software with and platform with their customers. For example, you can actually abuse a certain platform and actually use it in a way that actually can jeopardize your business. So for example, let's look about scanning, external scanning, right? There's a lot of tools out there, right? If you decide to scan a big portion of your customer base, right? And you start to ping those guys, right? You are at risk of being, sued or being open for other, kind of lawsuits, right? By your customers, because if somebody is using wrongly the kind of abilities of the platform to engage with different customers or potential customers of yours, that's a big concern that needs to be taken into place. So this is kind of, I haven't thought about that before, but when somebody told me, yeah, of course, if that happens, a raw employee can start kind of implementing different scanning mechanisms, right? Without their customers knowing about that. That's a problem.
Yeah, you make a good
That's
point. You make a really good point.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, it's, we tend to fear a little bit of the unknown, like, possible insider threat, right? Possible, disgruntled employee, whatever. And those, those are yet additional categories of risk that we should be evaluating and calculating, right? And so here we are, we've got a bunch of different, like, from our business impact analysis, from a little exercise here, thinking about what categories, we've come up with all these kinds of things that are risks to not just our business, but to our client's business. Again, our previous session, walk you through some templates, get you through that sort of stuff. You can find it all on our YouTube or on compliancerisk.io. But now that you've identified all these areas of risk, what do we do? How do we deal with this? Like, what's the next step? Oh, wait, there's a slide.
There's a slide for that.
Cue Steve. Perfect, right? So, we talk about business continuity, right? Or contingency planning, or, the kind of all these varying buzzwords that happens in the industry around CYA at the end of the day, right? And making sure that you have the people, the processes, and the technology in place to help mitigate any of these risks that you've found from your risk assessment, from your BIA, from your PIA, from whatever other acronyms you want to talk about, but really aligning your internal people, because it starts with them, your internal processes and getting the people on board, and then aligning the technologies, right? I'll give you a good example. We're in New England. It snows. In the winter, we get pretty severe ice storms, and power can go out for several days at a time, which is fine if you have the right things in place. So, for example, a couple years ago, half the state, or more than half, some large number, whatever, lost power for literally 10 to 15 days straight. My data center in a very well-populated city was down for 5 days straight. No power, no internet. At the time, there was no such thing as Office 365 or Google Suite. We hosted Exchange internally. This is probably 2003, 2004. We were hosting Exchange internally. And we lost internet and we lost email for 5 days straight. Now, because we did a business impact analysis, we knew that we could go without we could go without email for a certain duration of time because the company did not rely and communicate strictly with email. It was a convenience for them in 2003, not a requirement like it is today. And so doing your business impact analysis and then coming up with a plan. Well, the plan could have been, hey, we'll spin up another 2003 server, Exchange server, some other place in the organization. They have offices all over the country. And if New Hampshire goes down, we spin it up in Florida, and poof, we don't skip a beat, right? It's all about being able to look at that risk, look at the item and category in that risk, and determine what kind of people, what kind of processes, and what kind of technologies we can put in place, as Iran said earlier, to have those redundancies. Ron, anything you want to add?
Well, there's a lot to be added here in terms of, and I would like to touch, what happened.
You might want to consider turning your video off to save bandwidth a little bit so that you don't get all frozen up from time to time.
Well, I'll jump in. So my one comment is about simplifying.
In terms
So
of
simplifying. Oh, he's back.
He's back. So Iran, you keep popping in and out. Maybe pause your video and save the bandwidth.
I think we're good right now.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay.
We're stable. That's a redundancy. Well, maybe we should move into Teams.
Yeah.
That's an
Right.
option.
Exactly.
But talking about cybersecurity preparation in terms of business continuity, I think this is a major task for service providers out there. I think because it become so easy for companies to get breached and being attacked either by DDoS or ransomware or other means of communications and attack surfaces. I think the granularity and the kind of thinking of what can go wrong and which type of business applications which are which are basically on the top most critical for the business continuity should be taken into consideration and being mitigated and as an ongoing basis. For example, not many organizations actually testing what happened if, and this is something that we always urge our partners, test it. What happened if you are one of the applications, your RMM, for example, or your email security is gone? Okay, what happened next? Do you have any mitigation plan? Do you have any other platforms that can replace that existing one? How you address that with your customers? Those types of things are super crucial for the service level that you committed with your clients. And of course, protecting yourself as part of this whole kind of process of, how will I eventually address what has happened, what happens if, and what are the steps to come back again with the proper, making sure that I'm not losing any data, I'm not losing my client customers' information, I'm not losing any connectivity or other business impact processes or platforms that might make a severe damage to my clients, because eventually I'm responsible, I'm liable, and I need to make sure that as a whole, I have a proper plan in place.
So that you make a great point. You skipped ahead a little bit, which is fine. Ron, Steve, I'm gonna steal the
Fine.
screen share real quick. So Ron, you talked about, and go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. You talked about testing, right? So
Yeah.
I'll get into this in a little bit, but I'll get into like actually developing a plan and building on it. But a piece of your plan is annual testing, right? So here is an example, redacted, of course, of my business continuity testing plan that I go through every year, or when significant change happens, or when an actual event happens, right? So we talk about tabletop exercises as something that we should be doing. And here's an example, right? So we're going to scroll down a little bit. Like, we actually have a flow. How do we walk through a test? How do we test what it is that we're going to be doing in our contingency planning, right? This specific one talks about the power outage. Wait, I just mentioned that a few minutes ago. So we decide to do the test. How do we do the test? We walk through box by box. We bring in the appropriate resources. Before we even get there, though, we talk about what are the primary objectives of this test. Oh, we want to determine familiarity. We want to determine feasibility. We want to determine degree of contingency. So part of your contingency planning should also include a testing part. And this testing part should be documented and done either tabletop or in real life during the course of a day. And then, during the course of your GRC life cycle. So here's one last March. Oh, look, almost a year ago, actually, now that I think about it. Who did the test? What did we do? It's redacted, but you can see like the server room, and then the signature or blah, 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 blah. And so now I have not just my plan and what we do and how we do it, but I also have the actual test that happens every year or whenever it happens. So, all right, Steve, you can take back over. You getting a share up there, Mr. Steve? Nod your head. If you're not, I can go ahead and share. And Mr. Steve looks like he's a little frozen. So I'm gonna come over here and stop my share. Come over here. And see, perfect opportunity for us to be able to put into practice the contingency plan we put together for this webinar. Now it looks like they're both frozen. So maybe it's me.
I'm good.
So which one of us is frozen? Is it me or is it Steve? Well, it looks like we lost Steve. Thankfully, thankfully, we put in our own contingency planning for this webinar. I would have the slideshows queued up in case Steve or Ron lost internet. So here we are. You can see the slide, nod your head. Perfect. All right, so we talked about what is business continuity: planning, process, disaster recovery, preparation. Yes, James, this is going to be recorded. So a little bit about risk analysis and continuity planning. And I believe, Iran, you were going to talk a little bit about this. So I'm going to let you chit chat and I'm going to shut up for a minute.
For a minute, okay.
Don't hold me to it.
It's a good thing. All right. So let's talk a little bit about gap analysis. We discussed gap analysis on the previous session. We were diving into the different methodology of gap analysis, right? But now we're talking about risk analysis, which is a kind of variation of that. And so let's kind of review that, right? So in terms of risk, and the risk can, as we mentioned, resides in different points within the business, and we've covered that. So it can be within the HR, it can be within the if you're developing a software, for example, within the code, it can be a risk that's related to a third party that you're doing business with. But you have to understand in overall how risk is actually being measured. And I think, Tim, that's exactly what we are trying to put here. So we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. I think the first one is, what's the baseline? What's the current status? Where are the points that we need to focus on the specific risk, and what are the top main risk factors to our business? Once we do that, we can introduce some, I guess, tools, right? Technology, in order to assist us to better assess the exact risk that we are facing. And I would like to maybe touch, for example, couple of options or couple of examples of how we measure risk and how risk is being measured differently from different angles. For example, data. So let's talk about data. So within every data, PIIs, CUIs, those types of kind of data, every set of data holds action. That data is within your prem, you own that risk. Once that data is moving either out of your organization or being sent from a third party into your organization, the level of risk, for example, is changed, right? Because you give away some risk, you get in some additional risk, and risk is changing over time. And you need to understand exactly where actually that risk resides. And you have to be aware, how to treat that risk in any given time. That's one example. And there's many tools that can assist you to understand that. For example, in Synomi, we treat risk from a different perspective, not about the data, but we treat risk in terms of how compliant you are, for example. So if you have a set of compliance controls that you need to be in place, and the completeness of that framework, for example, is 70%, so you are at 30% at risk because you're exposed, those controls are not in place, and the risk has to be associated with ones of those controls that are not being covered. So this is another example of how risk and technology are actually kind of being one, right? And technology can actually assist you to understand where the gaps are in terms of what needs to be completed, what is not, and how it's being measured. Now, there's several other layers that actually affects that kind of risk, because if you bring an evidence is actually being, if your network, those are changing continuously and affecting the risk over time. So this is kind of the risk analysis point of view that needs to be taken in any given time based on the different platforms and the different processes that you as an MSP or IT consultant or any other service provider should take into consideration.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So, we talk about, planning and doing all of this stuff, right? And so kind of like, what is the process around BCP, right? And so, Steve's got a really good slide here around how do we do this, some steps in the process, right? I think one of the key bullet points that I'm taking away from here is really executive buy-in, right? Stuff comes from top down, right? And so, whether it's a 100-person company or a 20 or 30 or 40-person company, right? Being able to get that buy-in from leadership is really key to being able to making sure that, number one, they understand the risk that they face, right? Sometimes I feel like I'm an insurance salesman, because I spend way too much of my time talking about risk and talking about what their business faces. And I spend way more time getting the buy-in on the risk side as I do, like, it's a 80-20 split. Once I've, quote, educated or convinced, I like to use the word educated, my MSP clients that they need to see the risk and accept the risk. And it's really kind of awesome when the aha moment happens, when you can explain to them in terms and in words that they use and they can understand, and you see that light bulb moment and they're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Oh my gosh, how do we fix this? I love those light bulb moments. It takes 80% of my effort and education to get there, maybe even 90, maybe even more to get there. And once you get that aha moment, and this is, I can help some of y'all MSPs on the call, IT service providers, help guide you through that process. We have Jennifer Bleem from MSP Sales Revolution who works with us as well, help you get to those aha light bulb moments with your clients. Once that happens, everything else falls into place and you get a lot less pushback. So, you get through phases 1, 2, or 3 here, right? For blah, blah, blah. And you get to kind of like implement and train and wash, rinse, repeat. Like, those pieces of the puzzle become easier along the way. And it's less about convincing and more about action. And yeah, I love those light bulb moments when they happen. So yeah, Steve, what's up next?
Little refresher on the key risk factors. So this came out of the business impact analysis. So this is more just a reference of the different factors to look at when examining risk, a different way to kind of slice the impact. And from there, there's some operational issues that we really should address. How to define those risks, but also how to explain them. So how do you work with the different audiences, whether it's the business audience, the financial audience, the legal audience? So going back, Tim, what do you think? What's been your experience in various people with different roles?
So yeah, if a GRC guy doesn't use the word "it depends," he's not your GRC guy. So it depends, right? I have a couple of unique clients that have sort of unique ways they've structured their business. And one of them, while they do have a corporate organization, vice president, CEO, president, blah, 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 so on and so forth, the way they run their operations is, kind of a project base. So they'll have a project leader, and I'm dealing directly with the project leader that actually is the key decision maker for things that can impact the whole company, especially around security. So I might not be talking to the CEO. I'm talking to a project director that's working through their project that has a cyber risk that we've identified and bring forward to them. So I might be working at the project level director. I might be working with a CEO. Some of small companies, 20 or 30 people, they don't have all that board, CEO, legal, they don't have all that. I'm probably talking to the business owner who's also the CEO, who's also the legal counsel, who's also the janitor and the guy that buys the coffee. So it depends. How do we operationalize this? Making sure that you're in front of the key people that can help understand the risk that the business faces, and building those relationships with those individuals and gaining that know, like, trust factor.
I think there's, we've in the past, I've been involved in other startups within the cyberspace, and it was interesting to see the different way we presented risk to the management team and the board of directors. So we started with colors, graphs, right? Percentage of the risk. And the kind of the effect was different when we started to kind of putting a dollar sign to the risk. And that changed kind of the mindset of both the management and the board, and gave them kind of a more simple way to justify next steps in order to mitigate that risk, and better understand what the cost will be of not putting in place specific measure, processes, or platforms that will assist to reduce and reduce that risk over time. So it's really the presentation and the simple language that can assist, any service provider to kind of bring everything to the plate, in a very simple and digested way. And, talking, for example, with a CFO, I think risk for them is something completely different, because they look at the business from a different set of glasses, right?
Exactly. Know your audience.
Know the audience. Exactly.
Know your audience, right? So when I'm talking to a project director about the risk that they face in their project, they're not thinking about the financial impact from the COO, the CFO. They're thinking about, my project's going to get halted if I don't do this, and people are going to be out of a job, and I'm not going to be able to do my work. And a CFO is going to look at that and be like, hey, this project gets shut down, we're going to lose billions and zillions and trillions of dollars, and people will be out of work. An owner might look at that and be like, hey, project gets shut down, I don't care, because the project's kind of meaningless anyways. It keeps a few people employed, again, facetiously speaking. But the board of directors, like, oh, you know what, that particular project only grosses us 1% profit, I don't really care. Right? So everybody in this food chain has a different, it's just a life skill. Like, everybody has a different pain point. So knowing that your audience and identifying that pain point for that individual, and as I believe Matt put in chat, or somebody put in chat, like, it's an uphill battle. So being able to identify the next person in the chain and what their pain point is, and be able to speak in plain English in terms they can understand. Hey, Mr. CFO, you know what? We're probably going to lose this contract if we don't do this thing. And we're probably going to end up putting 12 people out of work, and you're going to end up losing a crap ton of money and not be competitive on the next set of work, because you no longer have those employees here, and you can't have that competitive advantage with their expertise.
Right.
Hey, Mr. Owner of your business, while you see this as a 1% gross revenue profit, whatever, and it's not a huge portion of your business, the impact that this project has on the world at large, they're curing cancer, they're doing brain surgery, they're ABC 1, 2, 3, like, you're going to lose face, right? You're going to have, you know, PR issues. You're going to have all these other things, like being able to speak to them in their language, identifying their pain. Like there's a common sales issue, identifying their pain points and speaking directly to them on their pain points. So yeah, we're getting pretty close here towards the end. Steve's getting us back on track with some tools and technologies. I think I'm going to take over the reins here for a second, Steve, and do a little sharing, if that's okay by you.
Fire away. Yep.
All right. So
It's a quick time check. We got about 10 minutes to go.
yeah, so you did I actually click share or no? Where the hell is my share button? Click share. Whew. I need a contingency plan just for my Zooms. All right, so we're going to show you a list of links here in a few minutes when we're done this, but I want to kind of give you a generalized overview of a business continuity plan and test. And as you can see, I made a little edits. This has kind of been slightly redacted, but the first thing that you'll notice here on the cover page, and Brian, I know you're in chat. What's the first phrase you're going to notice? Come on, I'll give you a couple seconds to type it in chat. 3-letter acronym. Ready? Insert Jeopardy music. Do, 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 do. Oh, that's one. Nope, way before that. Go ahead. 3 letters. It might be 3 words, but it is 3 letters that we keep talking about in the CMMC space. All right, I'll just say it. Controlled Unclassified Information. CUI. CUI, right? All of my policies and procedures and documentation is considered CUI. Now, when you look at the defense supply chain, the CMMC people, even if they don't get, you know, plans or, you know, cool, you know, submarine nuclear stuff, their documentation can be considered CUI. So that's just the first thing. I just kind of want to throw a little caveat out there. Because I choose to. Now there's NARA and there's all these other things out there that tell you what is and is not CUI, and that kind of ruling will be changing here soon. But I choose to make sure that my information is controlled, even from an internal perspective. I label them all CUI. Yes, FIPS 199, categorizing your system. All of this stuff is based on NIST. You can find this on the NIST website. But I just kind of want to give a quick run through of one of the available things that we're going to provide during my upcoming policy documentation workshop that we'll be having and starting in a few weeks. Sample example and how we're going to actually walk through. You know, cover page, you know, again, this says template, but we're going to actually walk through, you know, revision history, document history. Every single one of the things that we're going to be walking through has all these little blue things where it talks about what is needed for that particular piece. Oh, your system name, like I'll just keep scrolling down here. I'm not going to bore you all to death, but system description and architecture. Oh, inventory, CIS 1, right? CIS 2, right? Where is this stuff? What is the primary site? Have you identified, like, again, I'm not going to bore you and read this to you, but these are just some of the examples that we'll have available as part of our upcoming workshop on document planning and documentation and processes. But this outlines what should you do, how should you operate, who other people, identifying the information security officer, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Again, not going to bore you, but these, I'll just scroll back up to just the table of contents so you can kind of get a general idea of kind of what we're thinking here, right? What is it? What's the background, scope? How do we activate it? How do we get into our recovery? How do we get into our reconstitution? There is a whole process in place to talk about business continuity planning.
Perfect.
Then, oh, list of tables. Then we take all this information and we actually put the crap to a test. either annually or something during your GRC cycle that identifies when you should be testing. Generally for me, I review everything every 6 months, so that if it's an annual thing, then I have the last half of the 6 months to actually do it, right? I go through my process usually beginning in January, February, kind of get all my stuff in a row. I'm spending January, February, March, getting everything all together, and then outlining a poem or a plan of action and milestones on what needs to be done, what needs to be tested, what needs to be documented, what blah, 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 blah. And then I spend the last half of the 6 months going and actually doing the work. This particular document that I shared a few minutes ago is the actual test. So I've outlined what I'm going, how I do my testing, what's in my test, and then I actually go and do my test and document the results of it and the objectives and what happened. And then I take it to somebody higher than me, vice president, and review the test results with them, review the remediation plan after the tests have happened, and then get them to sign off. So yeah, Steve, you've got a couple of other resources you want to share on that slide. Before you do that, Aaron, you want to have anything to chime in on?
I think we're good. I think it's a perfect plan for a disaster, right?
Yeah. So Brian makes
disaster.
a good point. Brian makes a good point in chat, right? The thing with smaller clients is this can be overwhelming. Absolutely. And I recognize that. Like, heck, some of my clients are 2 or 3 person businesses, solopreneurs. That doesn't mean that I don't do the work with them. I might do it at a slower pace in smaller chunks that they can consume. And while it might take longer, it's in a manner and a method that they can understand, comprehend, consume, and begin to make changes. And like I always like to say, move that needle. I should probably coin that.
Trademark that. And no one's ever said move that needle before.
And it's about keeping your risk in check. You don't have to solve all the risk problems on day one. You just have to keep it in check and keep it moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing is to understand where the risk is in any given time, or at least if you want to have the ability to assess your current situation, have a tool, have technology in place, making sure that it's easy for you to build that assessments for you and for the customers of yours in an easy, plain English text that can be addressed to the right audiences. Tim mentioned, whether it's the CEO, the board of directors, the security guys, the IT personnel, or anyone that's involved within, any of the processes that involve risk into it. So, example, with Synomi, what we do is we're trying to, and I really put an emphasis on the language that we put in place in order to make sure that everybody is understand, where they are in any given time, what's the risk, what needs to be done, and to take it into, for example, the GRC and other platforms and the processes in place. So in a whole, you have a much clearer understanding the path that you take in order to take that risk from start to finish.
Exactly. So I dumped a couple links in chat, some from CISA, tools and technologies that they have there, some free resources. I would always caution you on free resources because nothing ever comes free. But CISA good organization, kind of got their crap together, some good resources. In addition to that, to roll back to Brian's question a few minutes ago about the smaller clients, if you want help, we do that kind of work here at compliancerisk.io. If you need and want an easy to use assessment platform to be able to present to your clients in a meaningful way, Synomi has a tool for that. And just like you always hear me say, like, you can't tool your way into compliance, but you can help with some of the tools that are available to make it easier to consume for your clients and easier to present, whether it's a CISA, whether it's working with us in our peer group, or white labeled compliance service, or it's Synomi and their assessment platform and the cool new features they're literally rolling out like yesterday. I can't even get into my platform today because I'm getting upgraded today, but yeah. So, oh, Steve, did I just take away your call to actions?
No, you presented the call to actions perfectly. You did it great.
did.
So the third call to action is next week. We wrap a ribbon around the first two sessions and talk about compliance. So we talk about, impacts and risks and contingencies and how that builds into compliance to make the package for the MSPs to present to their clients. So
What are we talking next week?
next Tuesday, same bad time, same bad channel. 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific time.
So there'll be an email that will go out. Watch for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, all the socials, Slacks, blah, blah, blah. There'll also be an email that goes out with the link to the next registration. You can always go to compliancerisk.io, either click on news or compliancerisk.io/webinars. We make it pretty easy for you to find. If you can't find us on the internet, we're doing something really bad, but I've been generally all over the place. So we look forward to having you all in next week's session. Do we have any Q&A or any questions that have been unanswered, Steve?
Yeah, so there's one question that comes up a lot is how do you figure out pricing and how do you calculate what you're going to charge? And is that different from your time and materials or your project-based statements of work, right?
Great conversation. I love the pricing conversation. We could probably save that for next week. But again, it depends. I look at it from separation of duties. The MSP side of the house, where I'm providing technology services, EDR, backup, blah, 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 all the traditional MSP side of the house, separation of duties. Your pricing for that. How that works. You've got that, right? I'm not going to go down that path. The compliance side of the house.
It depends.
It depends. Generally, it starts with a gap analysis. That's one initial cost. Sometimes you bake that in, sometimes you don't. Depends on the client, depends on if it's a new client or an existing client. Sometimes I offer this stuff because an existing client, I offer that as just part of what I'm doing, part of that CIO role, part of that QBR role. Talk to Alex at Lifecycle Insights. Some of these things can be plugged right in there, right? Oh, I should probably let Marnie and them know that I just plugged them in my webinar, whatever. But the compliance side, I can help you build a compliance program fairly easy. I've done it with other MSPs, and that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Good close.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We will.
Thank you.
We will see you all next week. And this concludes this week's session of compliancerisk.io, talking about business continuity planning. Thank you, Aran. Thank you, Steve. Looking forward to next week's session. And any parting words?
No, I think we have a teaser for next week. Yeah.
And Godspeed.
Thank you.